To start the recording.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Flux Dev Meeting. It's May 7th.
Cool. So some news of what we've been doing in the last 2 weeks. Kubernetes 1.33 was released. Today we finally managed to upgrade everything to Kubernetes 1.33 Go 124. It was quite an effort. Took almost 2 weeks. But we've released, I don't know, all the 30 Flux packages with the new dependencies. We've run all the conformance end-to-end tests for all the controllers with 133. So yeah, today we managed to close the issue. I'm really happy because this was a major requirement for the next Flux miner. Another thing, we are moving forward with RFC 10. Thanks to Mateus, we are almost there. We hit a major roadblock with the end-to-end tests.
I think I just
So
found
what
the issue,
we
so maybe
you
it's not a
think?
blocker anymore. So
Cool. Yeah, we also, so part of this effort, we also want to have better documentation around workload identity, node identity. How are you authenticate with using static secrets, static service accounts to the cloud providers? And after, let's say, after we manage to merge all the features into the controllers, the focus has to be documentation. So that's
yep. Oh, by the way, since we're talking about documentation, did you see my message about how to split the documentation?
Yeah, feels good. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but we need to start somewhere, right? We need to,
Yeah.
like we discussed last time, let's try and get all the current workload identity, global workload identity, control workload identity in the form that we like in the docs.
Yeah.
And then add all the new things to it. Another change since we last met was around the roadmap. I haven't got time to push a change. I'm still working on it, but we basically decided to move image automation GA to the next milestone, and basically we swapped the milestones. And in this milestone, we are going to release OCI repository V1, which is quite stable for a long time. Now we are adding multi-tenant workload identity to OCI repo, right? Mateus? Yeah. So I think that was the last major requirement for this API to go GA. I don't think we can, of course, like with all APIs, we can keep improving it after this, but
I
no
would say
breaking
the digest
changes ever.
reflection, right? For this to go GA.
Wait, that's not related to OCI repository.
Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. OCI.
So I'm talking about OCI repository in source control, right? It's the last API. We are still on beta with it. And given that it's widely used, we haven't found any issues in the last year with it. We can promote
And
it.
we have all those
Is
things like proxy, certificates, MTLS, all that stuff, right?
Yes, then we implement it there first, especially MTLS and all of that, right? So it's besides the multi-tenant workload identity, which is not basically a requirement for OCI repository, right? We are shipping this everywhere. There is no reason why we still keep OCI repository on beta, given that all the things that we've already implemented are working everywhere for a very long time, stable. So my plan is to promote OCI repository as it is. No breaking changes, no nothing, just change the version of the API in your Git repo or wherever you have it defined, it will work. So yeah, that's from me. Sorry.
Okay, so from my end, my updates are, yeah, so I was working on, I have all the pull requests for RFC 10 that will ship in Flux 2.6. Some things are going to Flux 2.7, but all of them, all of the PRs relevant for 2.6 are open and tested. There's just the OCI integration tests that I'm working on right now. I was able to run the Terraform in my account locally and see logs from the job. And so exactly what was the issue. And I've been actually working on this part of the code recently, and I understand totally why it's not working. So I have the right fix for it. So I hope in a few hours I'll have the OCI integration test for AWS working. And then I'll move on to GCP, which is removing GCR and using only GAR. That one will probably work without changes. It's just that what's wrong with my code right now is that we extract the region from the URL in OCI repos for AWS. And we use that region for the STS endpoint. It's not logically the most correct thing to do because one thing is the region for STS and one thing is the region for ECR. But at the same time, to provide a better UX, I think it totally makes sense to do what we do, which is extracting the region and using it for both STS and ECR. It's less configuration for users, right? And if you're choosing to talk to this region of ECR, you're probably fine talking with STS in the same region, right? So
yeah.
So that's a good choice from the past, which I need to keep correctly, and I wasn't in my code. So I'll fix that. And this is
it
my
was that
initial.
change. It was that change around the, I've seen you change that bit with the environment variable, right? When
Yeah, so
we read them.
yeah, good thing we should probably talk about this in a more broad context because I also changed some things around environment variables for Azure. So let's talk about this. So the thing is, in my discoveries, I found that when you configure IAM roles for source accounts or EKS pod identity, EKS mutates your pod to inject AWS underscore region environment variable. Okay? That does not happen for node identity. That's the issue.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So my
There.
pod, yeah, exactly. So that's why I assumed that we would have this environment variable for controller level workload identity, but that's not true for node identity. So
There
I'll
is
just
no
fall.
label, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we don't even add a label in AWS, right? You like if you configure EKS pod identity, you do nothing in Kubernetes. It's entirely like linking the service account with a role on the AWS AAM APIs. It's not inside the cluster. So EKS is just smart enough to see that and mutate the pod and add all the things. This does not happen in node identity. So I'll just fall back to our previous behavior of extracting the region from the URL. For KMS, we're able to extract the region from the ARN of the KMS key. And the third and last integration with AWS, when we have these three, are KMS, ECR, and as S3. For S3, we have a spec.region field, which is optional.
Yeah.
And we have to force, so we can't use that for controller level workload entity. It's just like wait, how
But wait, S3, I don't think it works with node identity.
Right, that's the only explanation. Because in the MinIO SDK code, there's AWS regional environment variable. So this SDK has always used the environment variable to do workload identity.
Yes.
And it never worked with node identity. So it's just ECR.
Yeah, and so why we made this choice while OCI URLs contain the region. In the case of S3, the
It's
endpoint
not
does
true.
not contain the region.
Mhm.
So we told people, if you use AWS, you should set the region. We can't make it required in our API because we support Minio that have a region, whatever, many other providers. But I don't think it's an issue there because since the first ever version, the Alpha 1 of Bucket, we have in the docs, if you are using S3 from AWS, you should be setting the region in the specification, in the Bucket spec, right? But we definitely
Right.
can't break OCI repository because in OCI repository, if there is no environment variable set by the mutation webhook, if you're not running in
Mhm.
Fargate and you haven't set the environment variable manually, then we should always look at the URL because that contains it, right? So
Mhm.
that's the only case where we can't assume that region has to be set explicitly somewhere and we need to figuring out from the URL. In the case of KMS, we can also figuring out from the SOPs metadata because we have it there, right?
Yeah, the
So that's why we
ARN
don't have
of
a
the
region
KMS.
we don't have a region in decryption. But for Bucket, that's special
Yeah.
as a source,
So
and there we
okay,
have a
so that's
region. Yeah.
good because my solution was to require the region field for multi-tenant workload identity in Bucket. Like it's a new thing, right? I can do this requirement. For controller level, I can't. But it's already required as like from what you just said. If you want to use workload identity for S3, you have to set the region or the AWS region environment variable, which is probably something that we did not document. So you're saying for workload
It's
identity in
not
S3,
about
you need
documentation. It's not
right,
about
right, right.
documentation. It's the default behavior of the admission control in EKS.
Yes, yes, yes. You don't. Yeah, okay. So it doesn't work for. Yeah, if you want to. Yeah, it basically doesn't work for node identity, right? S3, and
We never had
you.
support for it.
Yes. Okay. Okay. And
So we have in the docs, we have you create an IAM role for source controller service accounts that grant access to the bucket. And the example is you need to set the region in the spec.
right.
And we give you the IAM. Then we have the other example where is the static authentication, where you have a secret ref with your AWS credentials and you still need to set the region in the spec. And that's, we never mention here on the bucket API that we support node identity because
Right.
why? Why we went with node identity for OCI repository?
Because you already have to pull images for containers,
Exactly, right? So
right?
we want people to not have to do any extra things, right? If they already have, when you do EKS Scuttle, when you create a cluster, it automatically adds that, right? You can remove it and do your own thing, of course, having extra secure, but by default, you have that permission on all the nodes. So the permission was there, why not use it, right? That was the reason. Also on Google is the same stuff and so on. But for buckets, no. So we don't need some kind of we don't need that logic with, oh, we look at the endpoint, we try to parse it and so on. But for OCI
Yeah,
repo, we really need to preserve
yeah,
it.
right.
So it
Cool.
was so good that Sunny wrote the test for the node, because now we would have break it
Yeah,
everywhere and we
yeah,
would
yeah.
didn't know.
That was really good. Like I was ready to break this everywhere. Thank you so much, integration tests. Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying that for bucket, if you don't specify the region in the object, and it still works because EKS mutates the pod with the environment variable, and the library uses it as default. So that's something that works that we could document if we wanted. Just mentioning.
We should. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so bucket is gone. Now let's just decide about one thing, which is well, maybe we don't need to discuss it because KMS we can figure out. Bucket we have already decided how this will work. I mean, yeah, we're gonna just document this about the environment variable. Because I was just deciding on the logic for like how do I figure out the region in controller level. So right now for object level is I expect the region to be set in the library in the options. If it's empty, I check if an artifact repository was set in the options. And if it was, I extract the region from it and use. If this option is not set, I error out. This is object level. Controller level is the wrong logic. I just try to get the region from the environment variable, and if it's empty, I error out. So this needs to change
Yes.
to if it's empty, it needs to be exactly like control object level, except that if it's still empty after checking if the artifact repository is set, then I can still look at the environment variable. And if it's empty, I error out. So the only difference between controller level and logic and object level is that between checking artifact repository is empty and erroring out, I can still check the environment variable only in the controller level. Because I don't want to have environment variables
Oh yeah,
influencing
of course.
object level configuration. And that's another thing that's why I said that we should discuss about this, because I changed this in Azure. So in Azure, what's the logic? In Azure, we have to extract two annotations from the source account: client ID, tenant ID. Client ID
Wait,
is
but
mandatory.
tenant ID is optional.
Yes, that's why. Why is that optional? Because the admission controller injects it as an environment variable. So
Oh, okay, right. It's the same stuff.
yeah, yeah. It's like if you think about it, in GCP, a service account email is name, project ID, name at projectid.im.gserviceaccount.com. So you have a name and the namespace, which is the project. Same thing in AWS ARN. The account ID is in the ARN. The name of the role is in the ARN. Same thing in Azure, tenant ID, client ID. So both things are required for all of them. What happens is that when you're using like controller level, it makes sense to use this environment variable because the admission
Yeah.
controller injects it.
But for object level, if there is not in the annotation, we should just stop and error out.
Exactly. So I changed that. In my previous code, I was looking at the annotation and hurry out if there's nothing there for client ID, because it's the only option. But for tenant ID, I was fall back into the environment variable, and I'm not anymore. Because I don't want environment variable influencing object configuration. That was my thinking.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, so let's do this everywhere. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we should have the same behavior everywhere. So basically, object level workload identity has to be more strict. You have to say, I want to connect to this identity that belongs to my tenant, because that's why are you doing all of this, right? You don't want to use a single identity throughout the cluster. So we should just error out. Now we need really good error messages so people figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
That's we need good error messages, add tests for these error messages.
I have tests
So we
for them
don't
already.
break them in full. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk
Cool.
about the RFC, the OpenTelemetry one then.
Cool.
Adrian?
Yeah, hello. Um, yes, so well, we've been discussing over the last couple of weeks about it, and one of the main concerns that at least I understood from the conversation was like there is no, I mean, how to standardize the whole flow in terms of all the possible sources that we may have. Yeah, that was the main thing. You point to the RFC 5, which was related to the events, well, and how to um, standardize a little bit the format. um, and my idea here is that regardless of the source, it tends to be at least at the top source. When I mean the top source, might be the Git repository, or say repository, etc., etc. We are going to always have a unique ID or a checksum that will um, depict the status of that particular source, and that could be kind of the root span that will populate over the subsequent objects. Um, there was a specific scenario that differs a bit, which was the OCI repository source against, let's say, the Helm repository. It differs a little bit what it populates, um, as well as how to get that trace from the root, let's say, to the end, which might be, for example, a Helm release or whatever. So that's, I think, the point we were in.
Yeah, so we can't change in any way how what the information is in the revision and how is it formatted. So the revision format does not encode a source name, because the source is part of the object specification. So in all Flux objects, you have somewhere a ref to a source. It can be chart ref in Helm release, it can be source ref in a Flux customization, it can be, I don't know, event ref in a alert, and so on, right? So we always defer to, this is how we design the API, it's loose coupled. So basically when a consumer of the source issues an event, that event is for that particular object. So in no way the information should contain anything about the source, because that's the involved object. The involved object has the source. What we actually send in the payload is the revision of the source, no matter what type the source was, whatever, because the consumer's controller don't care about it. That's how Flux is designed. It doesn't matter from a customized controller perspective. It doesn't matter if you have manifests coming from a Git repo and there are Git operations, whatever, behind it, or if it comes from an OCI repo, which is an OCI artifact, whatever. If from a consumer point of view, you have a Flux artifact that you receive, right? So what the magic behind source controller is that any type of source, protocols and everything are a source controller concern, and in the end, source controller creates this Flux artifact. Now, the events of a consumer customized controller will have a unique identifier in the revision for that particular source. Now, our problem is right now is you have an alert configured that listens for events for, let's say, OCI repository, Flux customization, or Flux and release. Now, there may be the case that notification controller is down, the Kubernetes CNI is down, whatever, and you, or just by nature is very slow, there is latency, and you receive first the event from customized controller before you receive the event from source controller about that revision. What I propose and what I think we can do is, no matter how we receive the events, in which order, we don't care about it. We always look for the root span. If it's not there, we create it. And how we can make it unique is use the ID of the provider object, which is a unique ID in Kubernetes, right? It's a UID of a Kubernetes object, right? And we use this, and we use the alert unique ID. We concatenate it with the revision from the event. We do a SHA over it or whatever. And that's how we get the unique ID of a span, which belongs to an alert. That to the alert unique ID, we don't use the name, because if you have like 10 clusters, staging, production 1, production 2, production 3, we can't use the name of the alert because it will be everywhere the same. But the unique ID of the alert object in etcd, it will not be the same, because that's impossible. That's what unique IDs give us that guarantee, right? And if we use the unique ID plus the revision that we see in the event, and we have a SHA of that, and that's our unique ID for spans, that ensures that we have spans unique per alert. This is what we want to do, right? Because that's why you create an alert. You want traceability for some objects that you think are related, right? And instead of trying to figure out what's the source name so we can add it there, we don't need a source name. We need the provider user ID and the unique revision, because all the other events that will come in, let's say Git repo, 3 customizations. 1 customization applies a directory from directory 1, directory 2, directory 3. We want a span and attach, okay, I pulled the Git repo, then the Flux customization cluster add-ons reconciled this revision, then the Flux customization apps reconciled this revision, then the Flux customization, I don't know, databases reconciled. And you want to have this nice trace where one Git commit is consumed by various Flux customizations, and you should have them under the same, I don't know how you say, master span or global span, right? And instead of trying to figure out the source name, we don't really care about the source name. We care about the revision that we know it will match. But in order to attach it to something, we are going to attach it to the alert unique ID. That's unique across all clusters, unique across namespaces, unique across everything. So we don't need to change the revision in any way. And it's also, we don't need state in notification controller, because we are not going to generate these IDs from thin air and then we need to save them in a database. We have it in etcd, so we basically will be using the UID generation of etcd to give us the uniqueness. Then we already have this other uniqueness, which is the revision that comes from the Git SHA, from the OCI digest, from the chart version, everything that Flux supports. So I think that will be my proposal to deal with this, to create the global span. And I think then we don't actually need to enforce an order, because how you describe it, like, of course, if you think in terms of the absolute timeline, the timeline is I'm doing a git push, then source controller pulls it, and that should be the first ever event that his notification controller.
Yeah.
And then I should have a second event for customization control. That's in an ideal world with no downtime, with perfect CNI.
Yeah.
You always have, this order. Git push, global span gets created, Flux reconciles the customization, you add it to the global span, another customization, and so on. But there are no guarantees in a distributed system, right? So I think we shouldn't assume that the first event that we ever receive should come from source controller. It can come from any controllers. What we need to do is create the global span if it doesn't exist there. So we need some kind of function that does update or create or update or something like that, right?
Yeah, no, I like the design. Yeah, I think this way it's going to be way easier to create the spans and everything. I mean, you have the revision and the unique ID for the alert. In that case, then we might not need to have sort of an extra object for the tracing, might be implied within the events, I assume.
Yep. So I think using the unique ID from the alert allows us to be completely stateless, right?
Yeah.
Because
Agreed.
we have the unique ID, we have the revision. Then what we need to do is, I don't know, through the open telemetry libraries, figuring out, is there a global span for this ID or not? If it's not, created and attach my span.
Yeah.
And then we are relying on the statefulness of the open telemetry storage. We don't need to create something or on our own, right?
Yeah, it's outsourced a little bit,
Yeah. So now, if you, let's say, you go and change the alert. So you start with an alert that has a Git repo and a Flux customization. Then you do some refactoring in your repo and you split that monolithical Flux customizations into more than one, right? Which is a custom experience with Flux. You start with, I'm applying everything. Then you figure out, well, maybe it's not. Maybe I should split the apps from the controllers and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
You'll be adding a new object there. But then if in order to do this change, you should be doing it in Git, right? And because you do it in Git, even if now we are going to have more things that we are watching on, we are going to create a new global span for this change, right? Because it will be a new Git revision. So I don't actually see, if you are using Flux correctly, of course, and you are not doing kubectl apply on things, then we would have no issues with people modifying the alerts over time and adding and removing objects, because this type of operation has to happen in Git. So it will be a new global span. So you will not have these mixed things, right? You'll see a span with one Git repo, one customization, 2 events. Then you refactor, you add 3 Flux customizations. The next span, you'll see 1 Git event, 3 running, let's say, in parallel, or if you do depends on between customizations, you'll actually see in your trace that they are not running parallel. The cluster add-ons finishes, then apps starting, then the other one starting, right? And that's a great way to visualize, in a way, Flux dependencies, because if you don't define them, everything should run in parallel, and we should see all these events, right? Or the Git repo will start, and then you will fire off all these reconcilers, or everything will be like serial, like this one first, the second one, the third one. Now, there are cases where, like, what I think we need to do is document how alerting works for traces, and tell people, like, if you have a Git repo and a Flux customization, and the Flux customization applies hand releases, you shouldn't be adding those hand releases to this alert, because a Helm release source is an OCI repository, is a chart,
Yeah.
it will never get appended to this because there is no, like, a Helm release does not have that source. So I think what the RFC should do, the RFC should also have like 2 examples, one with Git repo, 1.2 customization, then another one with an OCI repo and the Helm release.
Okay.
Right? Because
Okay.
people have to think that way. I mean, you can't have a trace from Git to a Helm upgrade because that's not for real. I mean, you can change something in your Git repo,
Yeah.
and if the chart is the same, there will be no Helm upgrade. It will
Yeah,
be
that's
just customize control, apply something. So I think we need to explain to users that, you know, this traceability is for a source and the applier. It's not for a source and random appliers that are running in the cluster. I also saw that you were confused about this while writing the RVC, right? It's not obvious in inside, but it's how things are working. Like, there is also the case where you can have a Git repository as the source of your Helm release, but it will be different from the Git repository of your customization. You'll never be part of the same span, because then if you use Git repository as the source of your Helm release, then it's a Git repo that contains charts. It does not contain your cluster state or whatever. I mean, if you mix this all together, maybe. Should we tell people to do that? Definitely not. I mean, don't store your charts and your secrets and everything in the same repo. That's quite bad. So I think we need to clarify somehow in the RFC and have like these 2 examples, which are very common in Flux: Git repo customization, OCI repo Helm release, and maybe explain there, oh, when you have this configuration, you define the alert like this: Git repo customization, then another alert with OCI repo Helm release. You watch for those 2. And what will that result? It will result in this global span with these 2 events. And in the first example, you'll have 3 events: Git repo, customization 1, customization 2. In the second example for Helm, you always have 2 events, right? Because the OCI repo represents a Helm chart. Now, if you, let's say, have 2 Helm releases that are installing the same app in the same namespace, but with different naming, and you add the OCI repo and the 2 Helm releases to the alert, then you'll have a span with, I've pulled the chart, I've upgraded Helm release 1, I've upgraded Helm release 2, just for the fact that they use the same chart, the same source, right? And that will be nice. I mean, there are many cases where you deploy more than one instance of the same app because maybe you give it different configurations, maybe you do hard multi-tenancy, whatever, right? So that's also a great case for OpenTelemetry, where you can see, oh, I've upgraded my Helm chart. Now, what other things have happened in the cluster? Oh, you have 3 Helm releases, 1 for each tenant that got upgraded, and you'll see them in the same span, right?
No, I like this kind a lot. I was thinking another corner case might be, imagine that I'm using a Helm repository as source, but it's going to be OCI type. How that might work?
So adding the Helm repository in the alert is useless no matter what, because the Helm repository is just, if you use index YAML, points to that index YAML, does not point to a source. That's something that contains all the sources. Or you point to an OCI repo, and the Helm repository in that case is just for telling source controller where the secret is to authenticate. So Helm repository is very special. That's why we are trying, like, we are telling people, no, if you should move to OCI with Helm and not use Helm repository anymore, because there's not actually a source, is an index of sources. You can't represent that in a span. It makes no sense, because that's not what you should be subscribing for. What you should be subscribing for is the Helm chart. So the alert should contain Helm chart and Helm repository and Helm release, because source control, Helm controller, when you create a Helm release and you say chart, source ref, Helm repository, you also give it the chart name in there.
Yeah. And the version.
And the version. And what Helm controller does, it will create a Flux Helm chart object. And that's what source controller reconciles, and that's what gives it the exact revision that you receive in events. So for this use case, the alert should subscribe to Helm chart and to Helm release, never to Helm repository, because that's an index of things that can be one, many charts, many versions.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I don't think we should deal with Helm release, Helm repositories at all for this RFC. It doesn't really make sense from what you are trying to capture in a span. So the focus for Helm is first OCI repository, which a lot of people have now adopted using container registries for their charts, or directly defining a Helm chart, a Flux Helm chart. That has a source, whatever repository, we don't care about it, but you can define a Flux Helm chart, then in your Helm release say chart ref type Helm chart, my chart. Then the Flux alert will contain in the event sources Helm chart, my chart, Helm release, my release. Then when, let's say, you have a source controller finds a new chart version, it will issue an event where the involved object is the Helm chart. That will create a span, the global span. Then the Helm repository, the Helm release will create an event. I've upgraded to that Helm chart, and it will be appended to the span. So it's the same, basically an identical use case with OCI repository, but instead of subscribing to OCI repository events, you are subscribing to Helm chart events. And we don't deal at all with Helm repository, which is just something like an index.
Okay.
And just to mention, I think you mentioned Helm repository with type OCI, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In that case, it's even less because it's literally just the repository URL and the authentication configuration. Yeah. There's no index.yaml at all there. And by the way, we are like, that's something that probably exists only for like to make it easier for people to adopt OCI Helm charts.
Yeah.
Because ideally people should be using OCI repository API instead of Helm repository and Helm chart APIs. There's even like now there's some even less features in Helm repository. Like you can only use right now you can only use a proxy to talk to the registry. If you use OCI repository, you can't do that with Helm repository, for example. And we are actively trying to really get rid of we'll never get rid of this, right? Because it's GA, but we try to send people to OCI repository API.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I feel. What I was trying to go through all the sources and everything. Looks like this Helm repository source type is kind of the transition, like a friendly transition to an OCI repository, which is the intended source, if I might call it like that, in that specific scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you are using HTTP repos for charts, right, and you don't want to switch to a CI repository, what we've told people after we launched Helm release GA, you should be creating also Helm chart object.
Yeah.
And not let Helm controller generate random Helm chart object because they have this random number at the end. You can't put it in an alert because you don't know the name of it. Is not right. You should be defining the Helm chart on your own. And once you define the Helm chart on your own, OpenTelemetry should do fine with it because that's the actual source of the Helm release. It has a revision. It will always match the revision of the Helm release upgrade in the event, and everything will work just fine. Right? Maybe we should write a blog post about it and explain to people
Yeah.
OCR
we-
repo and Helm chart as the source.
We should emphasize that a little bit more because that's something I knew you could do, but it's not something I knew the reason why you would ever do it.
And there's also one more thing, like because Helm release creates a Helm chart object when you make it make it reference a Helm repository, then you cannot have multiple Helm releases referencing just a single Helm chart object, which is the same if you want, right? Let's say you have a Helm chart that you want to use for multiple Helm releases, then you're gonna have
Different
multiple,
ones.
yeah, you're gonna have
Yeah,
multiple
duplicate
different
it.
copies, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's resource intensive, like that's not just multiple objects in etcd, it's
Yeah.
storage in source controller, I suppose.
Yeah. Mhm.
Is that
And
true?
network, you'll be downloading the same stuff all over again for nothing, right? And verify, check, submit, all the things that we do. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think we should definitely, Kingdom, if you can note this down in the meeting notes. I think the takeaway from this is after all the discussion with the RFC, we realized that we know what the users should do, but we don't actually
Yeah.
tell them.
yeah.
I think we had some kind of some kind of hints about this in our release notes, but I definitely think it deserves a blog post. So, with two things. If you have charts in your container registry, don't use Helm repository. Please use OCR repository. If you don't have charts in your registry and you use the old HTTP repos, then you should be creating a Helm chart because there are advantages to this. You can reuse it. You can issue events for it. And in the future, open telemetry spans, right? And everything that we are doing next.
And if
Yeah.
we ever start Helm release API v3, chart field will be removed for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know where will be a Helm release v3, but anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah,
We can't.
When Helm 4 comes out.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah. Yeah. Who
maybe.
knows? Maybe that will be a good reason to.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever happens in Helm 4 that is super different, which can happen, or Helm 5. Yeah,
You
maybe
guys
that
saw
will
the
happen.
Argo 3.0 release came out, right? They called it small but mighty. I went fishing through the release notes trying to understand what is the breaking change. And the answer is there's not really a major breaking change. There are a lot of little things.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
okay.
Speaking of CNCF events, GitOpsCon is coming up at the end of this month, May 28th. And I got a talk accepted.
Nice.
I'm going to present about Flux notifications and receivers and the whole end-to-end. I'm going to try to do like an overview at the start. What are all the objects involved and why do you set these things up? Why maybe you don't need them in a demo since you can tune intervals really low, but how that's bad for production, and then how how you can monitor these things and what are some of the edge cases that I've experienced where they can, like for example, if your secret is managed by Secret Manager for your receiver and it reconciles, that can change the URL of your receiver. That may be a bug, but I'm not sure that it's a bug we can fix if it's GA. But
No, it's not a bug. It's a desired behavior. If
well, so if
so,
you're
you create.
provisioning your webhooks with IAC, that problem can go away as long as your IAC is also reconciled. So it'll be an opportunity to talk about the work that I'm doing with Crossplane and learning how All these things fit together, and some gaps in the ecosystem maybe, like the crossplane GitLab provider is kind of um, missing parts. I'm not sure if it's really missing parts or if I just am holding it wrong, but there are a lot of nice things to talk about, and I'm going to hopefully I have to get cleared to do this, or maybe I will just write a second one because it's going to take too long, and I only have like 3 weeks. I wrote a Flux controller, runtime controller called Flux Event Relay to help expose um, the node lifecycle events that are so disruptive to Flux that make the notification pipeline difficult to use, and how we solve that problem. So I think I will probably just write a second one because there's no way I'm going to get anything approved in 3 weeks in terms of open sourcing, and I have whatever I present has to be open source. So the second version of the second Death Star is already in progress. It's called Moonlander, and it has a second purpose, which is to um, work with Cozy Stack nested clusters. There's a small thing I need it to do to take a kubeconfig from the parent cluster and inject it into the cluster, the virtual cluster where I'm going to run crossplane so that we can manage Cozy Stack API from inside there. So it's not going to be a talk about that. It's going to be about Flux events and Prometheus configuration, but mostly Flux.
Right. So let me tell you about why the if the you change the secret, the URL changes. So in most use cases, like the uniqueness of the URL is also a secret, right? You don't want people to know the exact path so they can make notification controller do work for nothing. The notification controller is the only thing that you would ever expose outside the cluster for the receiver part, right? So let's say you have you create a secret in the cluster, and we use that secret to compose the URL. We use provide the receiver name and your secret value. Now you get the URL, you put it somewhere, then by mistake that URL is made public somewhere, right? You want a way to be able to get rid of that and basically rotate and get a new URL, a new unique URL that only you and your provider are aware of. So how you do that, you update the secret, you put some other value in there, and then Flux will automatically generate and all of the sudden redo its routing to now only listen to that unique URL, right? So in a way, it's not a bug, it's a feature where you can actually rotate your unique URLs.
Yeah, so the confusing part for me was when I started using Secret Manager, I kept the same secret value and the URL did change. And I'm not sure why that is.
Yeah,
But
It
because
shouldn't be.
the
changed
secret
several
is a
times.
hash of the secret and a few other parts. It's deterministic. So that's a really good question to look into why it changed,
Well, I'm
because
going
it
to
should be
dive into it.
deterministic.
I'm going to figure out exactly what's changing because people are going to see this and someone's going to ask the question, why do I really need to make this an IIC to deploy my webhook? And if you want it to be reliable and you're using Secret Manager, my experience is yes, you do. You need it to be uh, deployed and redeployed if the secret changes. And if you want to be able to rotate that secret, then yeah, you do, whether you're using Secret
Yeah,
Manager or
but
not.
maybe that's something like a timestamp to the value. That's crazy. I don't know.
No,
Yeah.
we don't. Like it has to be deterministic. It's
Not
like
not
ah
our code,
ah
the
ah
external secret stuff.
okay.
In two different environments, I saw the webhook URL change just based on deleting the secret and recreating it in place from Secret Manager. So whether there's a
Oh,
UID
you
or
delete the secret. Okay,
even with
okay.
the same value, though, that was the surprise. So I don't know if there's something in the metadata that gets hashed.
Wait. Yeah, I need to read the code. Maybe we also take this. The secret was recreated with the same name.
I think so. Secret manager. Yeah, it would have been the same name.
Maybe it was in the template of like how are you feeding this secret from the secret manager to notification controller?
You define an external secret and
So you're using external secrets.
yeah.
Maybe it could be something in your external secrets template.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the code now. So what we do, we extract the token from the secret and we use the name and namespace of the receiver. So if the token, the value of the token in the secret stays the same, there is nothing in our code that will generate a new URL. Like the code is very, very simple.
Maybe
Let me
there's
give you
a
the link.
Yeah.
weirdness about like a new line getting added at the end or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the value has to change in the secret, otherwise there is no way we are going to generate a new URL. Wait, one second, I'll give you the link to the source code.
It's there. I sent it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's really we have get webhook pass takes the token, the string value of the token, which is the one that you set in the secret. Then we do a sum, a hash over it, and the name and the namespace of the receiver. So it's impossible to change unless the token inside the secret has changed. Either is a white space or an enter /n, whatever that gets appended there. So I think you should compare the secret.
So
Like,
I'm going to cover that. I'm going to cover all of the different things that can go wrong with not only that, but also outbound notifications and how you can monitor the Flux notification controller logs for that condition that notifications aren't going out anymore, and generate a Prometheus alert from that, or perhaps a CloudWatch. I don't know, something else. Since
yeah, you need
So
basically a dead man
notifications not
switch,
going
right?
out is a really weird special case, because if
Yeah.
there's a decent chance if your Flux notifications aren't going out, that your Prometheus notifications aren't going out either.
Yeah, you need an external system, right?
Mhm.
It's the dead man switch theory where you need a third notification, like a black box that will ping your whole notification
And when the ping
setup and
stops
say,
coming, yeah, I found that
yeah.
example exactly. That's
And
going to
it's
be in
like
there.
this is old school monitoring, like in the 20 years ago when we had Puppet and Linux bare metals. And they were
Nagios.
like pinging each other, and oh, if the ping does not come, major alert, I'm not going to receive anything. I'm not going to know what's happening from this moment on. Yeah.
So if
Cool.
you're talking about conference news, should we talk about the news in KubeCon North America, Stefan?
No, we'll do a blog post about it. We
Okay.
are out of time. I need to jump to another meeting,
Okay.
so
Cool.
I need to go. Thank you, Adrian, for attending, and yeah, if you can express some of our conclusions in this meeting there with the UID and everything, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll update the RFC with all of this. Yeah,
Thank
we'll
you.
keep the
Thanks,
conversation there.
everyone.
Thank you.
Cool. See
Thank
you
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.